Hi everyone, Randy Lowson, Chief Marketing Officer at Conga, and today I'm pleased to be joined by Noel Goggin. He is the CEO and Culture Leader at Conga. And we're going to be talking broadly around companies managing their revenue. Noel, let's start with this. In your role, you have the opportunity to talk to lots of different companies. As you talk to executives at companies of all shapes and sizes in various industries, what do they share with you as their biggest revenue operations concerns today?
Yeah, listen, I think when I talk to a lot of customers, multiple fronts. One is they're all trying to figure out how do they cope with what I term as a pace of change, aka the surface area of the change they're trying to deal with in support of the revenue operations, and also the pace of that change. So it's not only just the quantum of work they have to do, but it's also the pace at which you've got to do it. And if I look at that across a bunch of different areas, the first one I would say is really around macroeconomic events, whether it is the Great Resignation, whether it's supply chain, inflation, war, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's just a myriad of things that they have to deal with that they just didn't have to deal with on a global stage from before. The second area then for a lot of them around revenue and the protection of revenue and the protection of customer lifetime value of customers, et cetera, is around how do they respond internally to disruptive technologies, and how do they stay relevant? So how do they sell the current products that they have while being able to invent new products and services that they go down the path on? If you look at the areas of payment, if you look at electronic vehicles, if you look at hospitality, transportation, micromilling, even the software industry itself has gone through kind of a massive change from license to SaaS that a lot of people have had to adjust to pretty quickly. Then if you also look at new entrants coming in and disrupting the status quo of the vendor set that are out there while companies try to sustain their revenue, grow their revenue, and find new revenue streams, there's very well-funded companies coming into their sectors or into parts of their sectors. Those companies just don't have any legacy, so they're not burdened with all the legacy of infrastructure inertia, ways of working, customers, etc. So they're just totally liberated from any of the existing stuff they have to do. I would also say that a lot of them are struggling with the revenue models, the new business models that have been introduced today. Historically, there's been lots of traditional revenue models that have been out there, true, tried, tested, etc. But every board is putting pressure on every organization today to figure out what is the recurring revenue stream that they generate within their business today. SaaS, clearly the software technology sector has been one that's led the way, has had these kind of really, really massive valuations of companies which are valued based on multiples of revenue. But there's many other ways to do recurring revenue streams, whether it's hardware as a service, transportation as a service. There's a whole myriad of that. And these are all new business models that have to be tried, tested out, vetted out, validated, etc. But they're quite disruptive if you're not ahead of things on a go-forward basis. And probably the last two things I would say, really one is around customer expectations. There's a real expectation by customers to have less friction, more ease by which they can purchase products and services, more self-service orientation of what they're trying to do, less kind of more integration of kind of the end-to-end life cycle from kind of ordering through to billing and invoicing and renewals. And probably the final challenge for them all is really getting talent into their organizations. If you look at each of them as they go through this transition of revenue management within their operations, how do they all get the talent that can drive them and bring them through this change management? Because the people who've got them to where they're at are not always the people who are going to be able to kind of implement self-service, digital technologies, be able to introduce new pricing models, being able to innovate in new technological solutions, etc. So those are some of the things that people talk to me quite openly about. And I think there's many of them can take a look at the retail industry, which frankly went through obviously a huge digital transformation with online ordering, omni-channel, buy anywhere, fulfill anywhere. And in that space, there was lots of new entrants, the Amazons, the Alibabas of the world. There's lots of established players who have invested heavily, really, really heavily, and really shifted capital allocation from traditional building out of brick and mortar stores to really digitally transforming their enterprises, like a Walmart or Home Depot or Nike, which have made huge strides in the last 10 years there. And there's been a bunch of laggards who didn't invest, didn't move, didn't have the talent to make that change. and they're no longer with us. People like Jim Burry and Payless Shoes and Pier 1 Imports and so on. And there's lots of lessons for people to learn there by not moving quick enough in what is today a complex space.
So one of the things you just mentioned was revenue life cycle. Why is it important for companies to think of revenue as a life cycle?
Yeah, listen, I think there's a couple of different things. Things generally have a natural life cycle to things. They start and the end in many ways. And if you look at any business, the fuel that organizations use is really revenue, right? How do I sell my products and services? How do I bill for those products and services? How do I manage cash flow? How do I manage these SLAs with customers and so on and so forth? And that's an endless life cycle. It's a life cycle in of its own. In addition to that, you also have customer lifetime value. So how do I start to maximize the share of wallet, the products and services I can generate from my customers over the course of time? And there's a number of key dimensions to that in my mind. One is that life cycle has got multiple personas. The people who are selling it, the people building it, the people contracting it, the people fulfilling it, the people renewing it, etc. The second thing is, I would say, around this kind of life cycle of revenue models. Revenue models continue to evolve. Whether it's one-time purchasing of a product, maybe capital allocation for a piece of hardware, to a set of services, which is kind of time and materials based, that may be a new revenue model that people introduce, to a recurring revenue model where people are selling products and services in a recurring fashion, whether it's SaaS in technology sector, whether it is rental business in other sectors. Those are all recurring revenue models. They all have a life cycle from selling to renewing to expanding within that domain itself. You also look at then things like M&A. Companies oftentimes use M&A as a vehicle to bring more products and services into the portfolio, typically with the thesis that they can cross-sell or sell those products and services back into their install base and leveraging that install base, reducing their cost of sales. There's a life cycle to bringing those products to market. If you also then look at the life cycle of moving from what oftentimes is very manual, the cost to actually acquire a new logo, maybe a direct sales motion, to automating some of that motion, to being able to introduce self-service, to being able to look at partners for certain segments of the business that it may be better suited, lower cost of sales to deliver on, etc. So those are some of the things that for us, we look at this as a recurring nature to it, an ongoing nature to it, multiple moving parts within it, multiple partners, sales teams, districts, regions, etc., and then multiple products within it, all through the generation of a life cycle.
So certainly in your role, or if you're a chief revenue officer, trying to get to predictable revenue is priority number one. So what complexities are inherent in trying to get to revenue certainty and predictability?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, as you mentioned, Randy, there's a lot of complexity involved. And we go back to the things I mentioned: scope of change, pace of change, new business models, new revenue types. We've got many customers right now, including industrials, who'll sell piece of hardware, software, services, one-time recurring in nature. And typically, because you have multiple product types and multiple revenue types, the way that they get to operationalize that internally is typically through a patchwork quilt of fragmented, siloed, manual processes, systems, and teams. And in order to be able to bring that to a seamless customer experience, it is highly, highly complex. And for us, that starts with, on the front side of looking at what is the singular product catalog a company has of the products and services they can sell to their customers. Today, that's typically buried in multiple ERP systems and multiple different sources. There's no consolidation of pricing. There's no consolidation of discounting. There's no history of what the customer has had through one division or another. The second area that there's a lot of complexity around is the actual contracting process. Sometimes those contracts may have legacy contracts. They may exist and have some governing terms and conditions. If they've done M&A, they may have multiple contracts with the customers through the various different acquisitions they've done. But as you look at kind of regulatory compliance, risk management associated with how they contract with their customers, bringing things more current and compliant with data security rules, risk mitigation rules, payment rules, force majeure rules, etc. There's a lot of complexity inherent in that, and what is fit for purpose, because They don't want to burden the little deals with all the complexity of the big deals, but they also want to make sure there's protection on the big deals with the terms and conditions that they need to have in the organization. Then once you've kind of gone through kind of getting consolidation of products and services in a single area, with pricing in a single area, with discounting in a single area, contracting, then the ability to kind of manage the fulfillment of those products and services through a back end that's really, really complex. So if I've got hardware products that are one time, I've got software products that are recurring in nature, I've got services that are time materials based. The back ends of those tend to be locked in different ERP systems, different billing systems, different order management systems, and we're able to create a holistic view of what the customer has and where they're at any given point in time in terms of the delivery against the contractual obligations is really, really hard. And then the final thing, which is really not a muscle that's in the industry today, is this renew and expand ability, where you've got an organization that understands what products and services customers are buying, what's the consumption of those products and services, is there risk of loss of customer, is there risk of downsell of a customer, is there risk of churn, is there contractual risk in the customer's health. The ability then to lay the groundwork so they can go back through and actually sell new products and services and change terms and conditions of contracts over the course of the customer lifecycle. There's just so many moving parts, so many personas, depending on region, depending on product, depending on division within an organization, that the CFO, the CIO, the salespeople, and the customer service people have to navigate through today in a very, very fragmented, siloed from a systems, a process, and a people perspective.
So I hear you describing a transformation for companies to really get to this revenue lifecycle with predictability and certainty. How do you recommend they get started?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, this whole kind of term of digital transformation is a very overused term. It's very broad in scope. And in the scope of what we're talking about around revenue lifecycle management, frankly, it can be quite overwhelming for organizations. So our kind of counsel on that would be you need to start with a big picture. Have a macro view to what you want to do and where you want to do it. And I would say kind of that goes across 3 levels. I think the first level of that is, how do you automate the processes that you have today within the definition of revenue lifecycle? The second thing is, how do you actually start to integrate those processes with both upstream and downstream systems, whether it's on the front office or the back office system? And then once you've got a bit of control in place, then how do you actually start to bring more intelligence to those processes and be able to start doing things that are maybe automated from a self-service environment, be able to do things that allow you to win more deals, increase your average deal size, et cetera, et cetera. So kind of going through this automated, integrated, and intelligent kind of level of what we're trying to do. So the first step, again, is think about big picture first, macro to micro. The second thing then is, once you have that kind of process in place, how do you build momentum within your organization by actually being able to prove out concrete, tangible business value in a finite period of time? Not these big waterfall, multi-year, multi-phase projects, but being able to, within 3 to 6 months, be able to deliver something that's of meaning to the business. Bring followership into the business itself, because once you get followership into the business, aka a macro slice, then you can start painting it back into the macro picture. The third thing I would say is, there's also a natural tendency for people to customize. We want to replicate everything we've had in the past. And we will caution ahead of that. The ability for people to implement standard out-of-the-box products that have been proven to solve the problems that people are looking at will onboard people from the maintenance legacy goes along with all the customization that goes on with software today. And finally, I was saying that many customers have so much knowledge within their existing contracts. Being able to ingest in all those contracts, being able to extract out key business terms within those contracts is going to provide a wealth of knowledge to help navigate and define how people want to drive better optimization in the revenue lifecycle management on a go-forward basis. So we would say start small, but with a big picture. We would say go with standard versus custom. And we would say go with automation to start, automate the existing process to start, and then get quick wins to build followership in the business itself.
Noel, thanks for sharing your insights. Thank you for joining us. We invite you to learn more at conga.com.